There's a particular emptiness that shows itself in the eyes. You've probably seen it. Someone achieves something remarkable, something they claimed they wanted for years, and for a brief moment, there's joy. But watch closely. The joy doesn't last. Within hours, sometimes minutes, it evaporates like morning mist, replaced by a familiar restlessness. What's next? They ask, not with excitement, but with urgency. As if standing still, even in victory, feels like dying. As if the achievement they just earned already means nothing, because it's no longer ahead of them, it's behind them, and behind doesn't count. Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in the worst place imaginable, a concentration camp where everything was taken from him, understood something disturbing about human dissatisfaction. He wrote, "Ever more people today have the means to live, but no meaning to live for." These people we're discussing today have everything, the achievements, the relationships, the possessions, but they have no internal mechanism to transform having into satisfaction. The tank has no bottom. It fills and fills, but never registers as full. Today we're diving into the psychology of chronic dissatisfaction, not the healthy ambition that drives growth, not the temporary restlessness that signals it's time for change, but the pathological inability to ever feel satisfied, to ever feel enough, to ever experience contentment without immediately needing to destroy it by reaching for the next thing. This condition creates lives of perpetual exhaustion, relationships built on disappointment, and a special kind of suffering where success feels identical to failure. Subscribe now, because what you're about to discover will explain why some people sabotage their own happiness, why achievement never brings peace, and what's actually missing when someone has everything but feels nothing. Hit that subscribe button, because this goes deeper than you think. The chronically dissatisfied person lives in a permanent state of future orientation. They cannot be present because presence requires accepting what is, and acceptance feels like death to them. So they live 3 months ahead, always. When they get the promotion, they're immediately focused on the next one. When they reach the goal weight, they're already planning the next 10 pounds. When they achieve the milestone, they've already decided it wasn't the right milestone. The real one is still out there, still ahead, still not achieved. What most people fail to grasp is that this isn't about ambition. Ambitious people find satisfaction in achievement before moving to the next goal. They have a moment of completion, of integration, of genuine pleasure. The chronically dissatisfied skip that part entirely. There is no moment of arrival, only departure toward the next thing. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, described human existence as a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom. "Life is suffering," he wrote, "and when we're not suffering from want, we suffer from the tedium of having what we wanted." For the chronically dissatisfied, Schopenhauer's observation becomes their entire reality. They swing between the pain of not having and the immediate boredom of having gotten. There's no middle ground where satisfaction lives. But why? What creates this psychological structure where contentment is impossible? The answer lies in what psychologists call hedonic adaptation, but it goes deeper than that. Yes, humans naturally adapt to positive changes, returning to a baseline level of happiness. But most people can still experience satisfaction, even if temporarily. The chronically dissatisfied have something else going on. They have what we might call an attachment disorder with satisfaction itself. Pay attention to this mechanism. For most people, achieving a goal creates dopamine release, a sense of pleasure and reward that reinforces the behavior. But for the chronically dissatisfied, the dopamine system has been hijacked. The pleasure isn't in achieving. The pleasure is in pursuing. The moment pursuit ends, pleasure ends. So they must immediately create a new pursuit, or face a terrible withdrawal, an emptiness so profound that achievement itself becomes threatening because it terminates the pursuit. If this pattern is already making sense to you, hit that subscribe button now, because what comes next will show you exactly how this dopamine hijacking gets wired in childhood and what you can actually do about it. Hedonic adaptation explains why lottery winners return to their baseline happiness within months, but the chronically dissatisfied don't return to baseline. They drop below it. Because for them, having something means it can no longer provide the dopamine hit of wanting it. The chase was the drug. Possession is the crash. So they need a new chase immediately, like an addict needing the next fix. Buddhist psychology has a term for this, tanha, often translated as craving or thirst. It's the restless, endless thirst for more that can never be quenched, because it's not actually about the object of desire. It's about the act of desiring itself. The Buddha taught that this craving is the root of suffering. And for the chronically dissatisfied, tanha isn't just a tendency, it's their entire operating system. Consider what this looks like in daily life. There's a man named Michael, successful by any external measure. He built a company from nothing, sold it for millions, married a woman he claimed was his soulmate, has healthy children, lives in his dream home. But if you spend an hour with Michael, you'd never know any of that brought him satisfaction. He talks constantly about the next business venture, how his wife doesn't understand him, how his house needs renovations, how his kids aren't performing at the level he expected. Every conversation is about what's wrong, what's missing, what needs to be different. His wife has stopped sharing good news with him because his response is always the same. A brief acknowledgement followed immediately by criticism or redirecting to what's not working. His kids have learned that no achievement is ever enough. An A- might as well be failure. His employees burn out trying to meet standards that shift the moment they're reached. Michael isn't trying to be difficult. He genuinely cannot access satisfaction. His brain literally doesn't have the mechanism to rest in contentment. Now watch what happens in Michael's internal experience. When something goes well, there's a momentary relief. But then, almost immediately, anxiety rises. Because if this is as good as it gets, that means there's nowhere to go but down. If he's satisfied now, he might become complacent, stop striving, lose his edge. Satisfaction feels dangerous. So his psyche does something protective. It finds the flaw. It identifies what's still not right. It creates a new problem to solve. And the anxiety subsides because now there's something to fix, something to pursue, a reason to keep moving. Stillness is the enemy. Contentment is the threat. This pattern often has roots in childhood achievement dynamics. Many chronically dissatisfied adults grew up in environments where love and approval were conditional on performance. There was no good enough. There was always room for improvement. The parent who never quite gave full approval. The sibling who was always ahead. The environment where achievements were acknowledged for 30 seconds before the conversation shifted to what's next. These children learned that satisfaction is a trap. That if you rest, you lose value. That your worth is perpetually provisional, always dependent on the next achievement. Abraham Maslow, famous for his hierarchy of needs, also studied what he called self-actualized people, those rare individuals who seem to have transcended the constant need for more. He found that self-actualized people could experience what he called peak experiences, moments of profound satisfaction, meaning, and connection. But he also observed that these people were rare precisely because most humans get stuck in what he called deficiency needs, forever trying to fill holes rather than build from fullness. The chronically dissatisfied live entirely in deficiency mode. They experience their whole existence as a deficit that must be corrected. They're not building towards something. They're running from an internal sense of not enoughness that follows them everywhere. So no amount of external success can fix it because the problem isn't external. The problem is the internal measuring device is broken. It registers everything as insufficient. There's a neurological component worth understanding. Brain imaging studies show that people who struggle with chronic dissatisfaction often have altered activity in the ventral striatum, a region associated with reward processing and motivation. When they achieve something, this region doesn't light up the way it does in others. The neural reward received signal is muted. Meanwhile, their amygdala, associated with threat detection and anxiety, remains hyperactive. So physiologically, achievement doesn't feel rewarding. It feels like temporary threat reduction that will soon return. This creates a particular kind of suffering. Imagine working towards something for years, finally achieving it, and feeling nothing. Or worse, feeling vaguely disappointed, because in your imagination, achieving this was supposed to fix something fundamental, and it didn't. Now you're left with the same internal emptiness, but without even the hope that reaching this goal would cure it. That's the chronically dissatisfied person's experience with every achievement. The goalpost doesn't just move. The goalpost reveals that it was never the real goalpost to begin with. What makes this particularly destructive in relationships is that the dissatisfaction extends to people. The chronically dissatisfied person approaches relationships with the same future-oriented, never-enough mentality. When they first meet someone, there's excitement, intensity, idealization. This person, finally, is the one who will complete them. But inevitably, the person reveals themselves to be human, flawed, incapable of filling the internal void. And just like with achievements, the excitement dies. The person who was perfect becomes inadequate, not because they changed, but because the dissatisfied person's brain switched from pursuing mode to having mode, and having never satisfies. Partners of chronically dissatisfied people describe feeling like they're constantly auditioned but never cast. Every nice gesture, every loving act is acknowledged briefly before the focus shifts to what they didn't do, what they could have done better, what's still missing. These partners exhaust themselves trying to be enough, not realizing that enough isn't a real destination in the other person's psychology. It's a mirage that recedes with every step forward. Erich Fromm, the psychoanalyst and social philosopher, distinguished between being and having modes of existence. The having mode, he argued, is characterized by greed, envy, and the need to possess and control. The being mode is characterized by sharing, giving, and deriving pleasure from the process rather than the outcome. The chronically dissatisfied are stuck entirely in having mode. They cannot access being. They cannot simply exist and experience that existence as valuable. They must constantly acquire, achieve, possess to feel like they exist at all. Fromm wrote, "Greed is a bottomless pit which exhausts the person in an endless effort to satisfy the need without ever reaching satisfaction. This is the chronically dissatisfied person's curse, the endless effort, the never reaching satisfaction, the exhaustion of perpetual striving with no arrival point. And the tragedy is that they're often admired for their drive, their ambition, their refusal to settle. Society celebrates them as high achievers. But inside, they're drowning in a poverty consciousness that no amount of external wealth can touch. There's also an element of control. Satisfaction requires surrender. It requires accepting that this moment, exactly as it is okay. It requires releasing the tight grip on the future and allowing yourself to be here, now, with what is. For the chronically dissatisfied, that surrender feels like free fall. Their entire identity is built on striving, on improving, on the narrative that they're working towards something better. If they stop, if they allow satisfaction, who are they? What's their purpose? The dissatisfaction, painful as it is, provides identity and structure. Removing it feels like dissolving. This explains why attempts to help chronically dissatisfied people often fail. You can point out their blessings, their achievements, their advantages. They'll agree intellectually. Yes, I know I should be grateful. But gratitude is intellectual for them, not felt. Because feeling it would require dropping the defensive structure of dissatisfaction that's been protecting them from something even more frightening. The possibility that they're already enough, that there's nothing to fix, that the emptiness isn't a problem to solve, but a space to inhabit. Carl Jung wrote about what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to integrate opposites and create wholeness. For Jung, satisfaction comes from integration, from bringing together the conscious and unconscious, from accepting all parts of yourself rather than constantly trying to improve or perfect. The chronically dissatisfied have no access to this transcendent function. They cannot hold the tension of opposites. They cannot accept, I am both successful and still growing. It has to be all or nothing. Either I've made it or I haven't. And since made it is an impossible standard, they exist in permanent failure despite external success. The path out of chronic dissatisfaction isn't more achievement. That's like trying to quench thirst by drinking salt water. The path is radically different. It requires developing what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to fix or escape it. For the chronically dissatisfied, learning to tolerate the feeling of enough without immediately creating a new problem is incredibly difficult. It feels like dying, but it's actually the beginning of living. The practice might start small, achieving something and pausing, literally pausing for a full day before planning the next thing. Sitting with the discomfort of satisfaction, noticing the urge to undermine it, to find the flaw, to create the next pursuit, and not acting on that urge, just noticing. This is excruciating for someone whose entire nervous system is wired for perpetual motion. But in that pause, something new becomes possible, the experience of sufficiency. The radical notion that this moment doesn't need to be different to be okay. Mindfulness practices can help, not because they're trendy, but because they literally train the brain to be present rather than future-focused. When someone with chronic dissatisfaction begins to notice their thoughts, they start to see the pattern. I'm doing it again. I'm making this inadequate. I'm creating the next problem. That awareness doesn't immediately change the pattern, but it creates a tiny gap. And in that gap, choice emerges. The choice to consciously stay with satisfaction for just a moment longer. Therapy, particularly approaches that address attachment and early relational wounds, can be transformative. Because the dissatisfaction often isn't about achievements. It's about the internalized message that love is conditional, that you must earn your right to exist, that rest equals worthlessness. Healing requires reparenting yourself, learning to give yourself the unconditional acceptance you never received. Learning that you can be loved for being, not just for doing. This is deep work. It doesn't happen in weeks or months, but it's the only work that actually addresses the root. Some chronically dissatisfied people find relief in shifting their relationship to goals entirely. Instead of achievement-focused goals, they develop process-focused intentions. Not, I will make X amount of money, but I will engage meaningfully with my work. Not, I will lose 20 pounds, but I will move my body in ways that feel good. This shift removes the finish line that, when crossed, creates the satisfaction-threatening moment of arrival. Instead, there's only ongoing practice, which the dissatisfied person's brain can handle better because it never ends. Others find that contribution, giving without expectation of return, provides a different kind of satisfaction that doesn't immediately evaporate. When you help someone else, the reward is in their experience, not your achievement. This bypasses the broken reward circuitry around personal accomplishment. It creates meaning through connection rather than through acquisition or achievement. Viktor Frankl himself found meaning in the concentration camp by helping others, by maintaining his humanity through service despite unimaginable conditions. Here's the paradox that the chronically dissatisfied must eventually face. The very striving that you think is protecting you from worthlessness is what's preventing you from experiencing worth. You believe you'll feel valuable when you achieve enough. But the mechanism you're using to achieve the constant dissatisfaction is what makes feeling valuable impossible. So, you're running on a treadmill you built yourself, and you're so focused on running faster that you can't see you're not actually going anywhere. This is the psychology of people who can never feel satisfied. Not because they're ungrateful or don't appreciate what they have, but because their internal measuring system is fundamentally miscalibrated, registering every state as insufficient, translating every achievement into immediate inadequacy. Understanding this doesn't fix it instantly, but it does offer something crucial: the recognition that the problem isn't out there in the world of goals and achievements. It's in here, in the relationship with yourself, in the learned belief that you must always be more than you are to deserve peace. Because in the end, satisfaction isn't something you achieve, it's something you allow. It's not a destination you reach through effort, it's a state you access through surrender. And when you finally understand that, when you really understand it, the chase loses its urgency. Not because you stop growing or striving, but because you stop believing that your worth depends on it. You become someone who can achieve without attaching your entire identity to the achievement. You become someone who can rest in sufficiency without feeling like you're dying. And that, paradoxically, is what makes sustainable growth possible. Not the frantic running from inadequacy, but the calm building from enough. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, I want you to try something this week. Achieve something, anything, and pause for 24 hours before moving to the next thing. Just sit with the completion. Notice what comes up: the anxiety, the urge to diminish it, the impulse to find the flaw. And instead of acting on those impulses, just observe them. Share what you notice in the comments below. Your observation might help someone else recognize they're not alone in this. And if this video helped you see the pattern clearly, share it with someone who's exhausted from never being satisfied. Sometimes the first step is naming what's actually happening.